Once you've recorded and are satisfied with all your individual tracks, it's time to turn your attention to making them sound good when they're all played together. This process is called mixing, and that's exactly what you're doing. You're figuring out exactly at what volume levels you want to mix the individual tracks together to produce the complete song. I've opened up a song file called Ruinous Mixing, which is a full-length version of the song we recorded in the previous chapter. So with this version of the project, a vocal track has been added, and as before, I've split the software drum track into separate tracks for kick, snare, toms, hi-hat, and cymbals. So we'll be mixing this song in this chapter. I also want to stress that what I'm going to be showing you is the way that I like to work when mixing a song. This is what works for me, and I'm just going to pass along what I hope are some useful tips for you that you can use in your own work. But you're going to find when it comes to mixing, whatever works for you is fine. The first thing I like to do before I start mixing is to do a little house cleaning. Now, I only have about a dozen tracks in this song, but in many cases, you'll have several more tracks in your completed song, and it might be hard remembering which performance is on which track, especially when the tracks are named after their guitar effects and MIDI instruments. So you'll probably find it useful to give the tracks more specific names. For instance, this first guitar track here is the rhythm guitar track, which just has the default name of the amp we used, Brit and Clean. The next one is named Broken Up Brit, followed by the bass track, Modern Stack. And this last track here is the vocal, and it's just labeled audio track. Now, the only reason I know it's on these tracks is because I'm the one who recorded these parts. But when I'm mixing the song, I'll definitely find it much easier to work with these tracks if I know exactly what they are at a glance. So let's just take a moment to rename them. Just double-click them, and just give them more specific names. Naming your tracks is especially important if you're going to be working with other people on the mix, or if you're going to be sending the project to someone else to mix. Without clear labels, the process will take so much longer. You might also find it useful to rename the regions in the tracks too. You might have noticed that when you record, the regions take on the same name as the track. To rename a region, just right-click it, and click the only option that appears here, Rename Regions. Now you could give it the same name as the track, but you don't have to. You might want to name the regions based on what they contain, or to describe what needs to be done to the part. For instance, if I knew I wanted to come back to this region to fix a timing issue, I could type, need to quantize. And in that way, I can remind myself to quantize the track later. But it's entirely up to you. I'm just going to hit Command-Z to undo that, and I'll leave the regions with their default names. I also find it very useful to always keep my tracks in a particular order, no matter what song I'm working on, and that helps me navigate to the tracks that I need much more easily when I'm working. So I usually like to start with the kick, followed by the snare, followed by the hi-hat, then the rack toms, the floor tom, and then the cymbals. After that, I like to move the bass up, and then we'll go rhythm guitar, lead guitar, and vocals. Again, that's just my personal preference, and you'll probably find an order that you like to work in too. Next, notice how the song pretty much starts on measure 2. So there's one measure of silence on almost all of these tracks. The exception is the snare track, which has a lead-in note on the 4th beat of the first measure, and that starts off my song. But the rest of the tracks are empty during that first measure. Now, with the softer instruments, that doesn't really matter. But on some real instrument tracks, you might hear some unwanted noise when there's supposed to be silence, like a string noise from a guitar, or a hum or a buzz from some other instrument. So for example, I'm going to solo the lead guitar track, and let's listen to this from the beginning. So there's just a little bit of noise there right before the guitars start playing. We can hear him putting his fingers onto the strings. Now you might not hear that in the full mix, but there is actually silence on the rest of these tracks, so you probably will hear that. If you want to make sure that it won't be heard at all, just trim down the beginning of the region. And now it sounds like this. Now I think when I listened earlier, I also heard some noise on the bass track as well, so let's solo that. Actually, no, that one's pretty clean. Listen again. Okay, there's a little bit of noise there. Why don't we just trim that in too, and we won't have to worry about it at all. That sounds better. So basically, you might want to go through and listen to each real instrument track on its own to see if you can hear any unwanted noises. And as you spend more time staring at waveforms, you'll even start to develop an eye for recognizing unwanted sounds just by seeing the shapes of the waveforms. For example, in the vocal track, this little bump that we see here is clearly not as loud as the other waveforms, and it's very short. So this might be an intended vocal part, but it might be also something like a cough, or maybe the singer dropped something in the recording booth right before we started singing. Let's see if we can hear it.
When you say...
So that's clearly a cough. Now instead of trimming this out all the way from the beginning here, I'm just going to place the playhead right after that cough, and with the region selected, I'm going to press Command-T on my keyboard to split the region. Now I can just click off to deselect both of those regions, select the first one, and then hit delete. So in some cases, that might be faster than trying to trim the entire region. I can just split it and delete the part that I don't want. But bear in mind, this is also non-destructive. I can always untrim a region that I've split to restore the chopped off portion. I'll just undo that. Now you should also go to the end of your song. I'm going to unsolo the lead vocal here. And here you want to see where the end of song marker is. The end of song marker is a little triangular button that appears up here in the timeline. It's possible that it's hidden behind the zoom controls here, which in this case it is. But all I have to do here is just zoom out, and it'll eventually be a little easier to grab. There it is. So that's the marker right there. And I'm going to place this so it sits right to the right of the last and longest region. Basically, this tells GarageBand that this is where the song is over. If I had left it sitting several measures away where it was, when I go to export my song to iTunes, I'd end up with a lot of silence covering all the empty space between where your recording ends and where the song marker is. So you want to make sure that you drag the end of song marker to where your song actually ends. Zoom back out a little bit again here. So those are just some ways for you to get organized before you start mixing your song. Once you have your own system figured out, you'll probably find yourself renaming tracks and regions or selecting icons as you record each track. Remember that you can select icons for tracks by right-clicking on them and then choosing icons from here. Or you might wait until right before you mix to do all your organization. Or on the other hand, you might decide to get organized only after realizing what a mess of tracks you've created and it takes you forever to find certain tracks. Again, just do whatever works best for you.